In the last two paragraphs, we read that Dr. Feldenkrais recognized that humans learn from our individual experience, while animals from collective experience of species, which in a way you could think of as evolution, right? That changes in how spiders spawn their webs will happen from generation to generation, perhaps through mutations, while we do things differently depending on our own experience, our life. That's why it's for spiders, for the same species, the webs will look very similar, while in humans you have Picasso and you have Matisse and you have Rembrandt and Vermeer and all sorts of painters that approach the art and craft differently. We also learned that learning is not stable, it's not fixed. It doesn't mean that when you learn one thing one way, the action, the act, the way you respond to a familiar stimulus will be the same. As long as the environment is the same, it's likely to be perpetuated, but as we change environment, our learning can change. And Dr. Feldenkrais made the claim that it's even possible to forget your mother's tongue. The last paragraph was about individual experience, how individual experience influences our learning. And in case of speech, the sooner we start, the first attempts at learning speech, our first exposure when we were babies, will form the strongest connections. And in fact, those connections can inhibit our attempts of learning new language. For me, Polish was my native tongue, and this was the language that I learned first. So therefore, learning English is based on the forms of using my tongue, my lips, my vocal cords in a specific way. From my own experience of learning American English, the challenges, for example, are with differentiating between cup, cap, cup. You see, even now, after all these years, after 33 years of living here in this country, I have to use my surface of the brain, that neocortex, that cognitive brain, to produce these sounds. While for native American, it will just roll off the tongue, meaning you will use the lower parts of the nervous system to execute. For me, I have to think. Let's give another example. Stamp, stump, stump. And therefore mistakes are so frequent for me to differentiate. Stamp, stump, stump. Stamp, stomp, stump. So, our early experiences impact our future learning. And that's why I'm, as a physical therapist and Feldenkrais practitioner, that's why I see such an importance of early mobilization and early rehabilitation after injury. Because you don't want to form early patterns of coping with broken leg, with torn meniscus or shoulder troubles, and form habits that you will be building your new learning on top of. For example, if you're limping, you want to learn as soon as possible how to let go of that compensatory pattern. At the early stages, it may be necessary to unload the leg or not to use the limb or body part at all, and that's quite okay. But as you are starting to bring that part back to life, back to online, back to action, you want to learn how to do it well as fast as possible, because I often see people showing a certain pattern of walking years after the ankle injury. The timing of learning matters. The sooner we start, the better. And the timing impacts influences, but doesn't determine the future learning. power of our brain is that we are capable of forming new connections even after the first connections were made. When child learns language for the first time, babies usually about 4 months start to do babbling sounds. And then it takes another maybe 3 months for the baby to produce repetitive sounds like da, 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 da. So 3 months from the first bob, 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 babbling sounds to the repetitive patterns. In learning language, we try to skip many of these sounds producing forms and go right away to words, to expressing ourselves, to learn to differentiate between cup, cap, cup sounds. I would need to go with kind of baby things that we are so self-conscious, like blah, 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 to produce sounds before we incorporate them into words or full sentences. Paragraph 13, men's greater power for adjustment. These observations will help us to understand why posture in standing and walking can be so different in different people, even though it is controlled by a part of the brain whose functions are closer to instinctual than voluntary action. Upright posture, like speech, has no ready-made connections of cells of the nervous system, although walking become established before speech. In this function, too, man adjusts with more freedom to his surroundings than do some herd animals, for instance, who can walk, run, fall, and right themselves again within a few minutes of their birth, regardless of the terrain on which the animal happens to be born. The functions established and fixed from birth show only small variations from one individual to another, while differences are the rule in the functions developed by individual through his personal experience. So yes, when baby giraffe is born, it can follow its mother right away, within seconds from birth. Human baby, you know, it takes about a year for a baby to follow its mother on their own feet. And it actually takes 7 years to develop fully mature gait. So it's a very long process of apprenticeship. But what Feldenkrais makes a case that because it's our individual experience that will determine our way of moving, holding ourselves, walking, or our future professions, is where such variety is possible. He makes a claim that baby giraffe probably will be walking very similarly to another baby giraffe, or one spider will have a similar web to another spider, while in humans we can have such a variety of ways of holding ourselves, and that includes our posture and our gait. Feldenkrais states that although walking become established before speech, and if you study babies, you'll see that sometimes the speech patterns are shifting during the time where baby masters their walking. Some babies slow down their speech development while walking, while training themselves on walking. There are claims that early walkers are slower in developing speech, although it is not a universal condition, because one could make a claim that when the baby starts to be upright and move around, their environment is richer. And typically babies first develop gestures before vocalization. For example, the baby will carry a toy, a little teddy bear, and it will walk toward the caregiver and show the teddy bear. And then caregiver would say, "What is it? Is it a bear?" And therefore the form of communication exchange starts, which is much richer than if the baby is lying down right? The baby can navigate, can move around, meet more people, expose themselves to more richer learning environment and interaction environment where gestures can develop and then vocalization later on. Paragraph 14, dynamic aspects of posture. As long as we consider the standing and sitting posture as static conditions, it is difficult to describe them in the way that might lead to improvement. If this is what we seek, we must examine their dynamic aspect. From the dynamic point of view, every stable posture is one of a series of positions that constitute a movement. In moving from side to side, a pendulum passes through the position of stability at maximum speed. When the pendulum is in the stable state, at the midpoint of its path, it will remain there without moving until some outside force is applied to it. This stable position requires no energy for its maintenance. In walking, getting up, or sitting down, the human body, of necessity from time to time, also passes through the upright, stable position that requires no energy. However, in the cases where movements are not perfectly adjusted to gravity, the body's passage through the stable position is not clearly defined, and the muscles continue to perform superfluous work. No effort is required to maintain the standing and sitting postures, which are positions of stability. In the stable state, only a minimum of energy is required for the beginning of any movement, and therefore none in order to remain at rest. So here could be, again, slightly confusing ideas. In the previous few chapters, he talked about humans not being aware of the work of anti-gravity muscles. For example, we're not aware of our jaw muscles working all the time to keep the mouth closed, or our neck muscles holding our head from tilting forward. In here, he's making a claim that in the stable sitting or standing positions, we don't need any input of energy to hold ourselves. I think more fortunate expression would be that it's the minimum effort, because we always need some energy, some muscle contractions to hold ourselves upright. You might have seen me putting a skeleton, my skeleton George at the office, in sitting position, and George can hold himself on the bones with no nervous system, with no muscles, in sitting upright. Standing is not possible. Calf muscles, some muscles of the hip, buttocks are required to maintain upright standing. So, but no matter what it is, if it's just a minimum effort, it's very important idea that when muscles are free from holding, they're free to perform movements. And therefore we can initiate movement right, left, up, down, forward, back, squat down, jump up with minimum effort. We're always in this martial artsy state of potency. While when we have to hold ourselves, when my body part is falling, head is falling to the side or is dragging, muscles are contracted, and therefore I'm not able to execute, to start to initiate movements at an instance. It's also interesting earlier in this paragraph when he talks about that often we perceive posture as something static, a photograph taken. And this only represents a fraction, a milliseconds in time. For example, if he talks about pendulum swinging from right to left, my head tilting a little right and left. At any moment, you could take a snapshot and say, oh, look, this is a bad posture, or this is a good posture. And in fact, this only one balance point exists only at it one precise geometrical position. while in life we'll be always in movement. You're taking breath in and breath out. At every moment of inhalation and exhalation, you will be in a different posture. So therefore, talking about some static, idealized idea is futile. Please comment below your thoughts about posture and your thoughts on the material that we're reading. Until the next time.